The Importance of Playing Nice. Incivility in Modern American Politics by Virginia Hand. A lack of manners and respect have become the norm when two opposing sides engage in political discourse. Everyday citizens aside, even politicians are engaging in behavior that was considered wildly inappropriate not too long ago. There is now an abundance of uncivil talk in our present political communication that is either racist, sexist, homophobic, or just plain rude, and some of it even includes thinly veiled threats of violence. Now, there are varying theories as to why there has been so much incivility in politics. Some studies center around social media, which has brought about the speed, the means, and sometimes the comfort of anonymity that allows for the proliferation of not only extreme opinions, but extreme modes of expressing them. Both a 2018 study by Frymer and Skitka and a 2018 study by Oz and colleagues take a hard look at the effects of political civility on Twitter, Facebook, or both. Frymer and Skitka tested whether political civility of members of US Congress predicted the same political body's public approval over a 20-year time span. I've included a graph with some of their findings. For political civility, they measured the civility versus incivility of the language of US politicians by downloading and text analyzing the entire US congressional record, all 267 million words spoken by members of the US Congress during floor debates between 1996 and the end of 2015. For approval of Congress, they operationalized public approval as the overall public approval of Congress in a given month. They found that the relative degree of civility and incivility in congressional speech over 20 years predicted subsequent congressional approval. Approval of Congress also predicted the subsequent civility of congressional speech. This graph demonstrates how from 2007 onward, political incivility and public disapproval have been the norm. However, politicians were more civil and Americans more satisfied with Congress between 1997 and 2003. Also in their study, they analyzed the effect President Trump's civil and uncivil tweets had on people identifying with varying levels of support. To test how the tweets altered participants' feelings toward the president, they calculated change in feeling scores for each participant. They first tested whether the civility versus incivility of Trump's tweets changed how Americans felt about him, and whether it depended on the political stance of the observer. They found for Trump opponents and moderates, change in approval of Trump was more positive after reading civil versus uncivil tweets, whereas for Trump supporters, there was no change. In the study from Oz and colleagues, they used two quantitative methods in order to understand whether user-generated posts varied in frequency of incivility and impoliteness on Twitter versus Facebook. A quantitative content analysis revealed that posts regarding responding to the White House's tweets were Facebook posts. Also, comments on posts that concerned sensitive topics, such as same-sex marriage, were more uncivil and impolite than comments regarding less sensitive topics, such as technology. Their experiment showed that people were more deliberative when responding to White House Facebook posts compared with White House tweets, but no differences were found for incivility and impoliteness. Their results suggest that both the varying affordances of the two platforms and the fact that the two sites may attract different types of people might explain their results. On the other hand, a 2007 study by Dalton and a 2012 study by Wolf and colleagues focused on whether affiliation with a particular party is the driving force behind our political thinking and attitudes. Dalton made a point that the concept of party identification is central to our understanding of American electoral behavior. And this research builds upon the logic of party identification, asking what occurs if citizens become better able to manage the complexities of politics without relying on habitual party cues. Using data from the American National Election Studies, he found a differentiated and de-aligned electorate. He suggested this shift had the potential to move the electoral process toward the ideal of democratic theory, where voters make independent judgments on the candidates and issues at hand, rather than voting on the basis of habitual party loyalties inherited from one's parents. In opposition to this, Wolf and colleagues argued that a second layer of party polarization had developed that went far beyond simply issue and ideological differences. A growing unwillingness to want politicians to compromise with the other side and digital incivility search found that a solid percentage of the electorate held strong partisan preferences and wanted their party leaders to stand firm on principle rather than compromise with the other side. Furthermore, the strong partisan mood was not simply driven by the particular conditions of the 2010 midterm election, such as the Tea Party or particular regions. Rather, the divisive partisan atmosphere existed generally and was not concentrated in electorally competitive areas. It is clear that there is no real way forward unless we can find middle ground. In her book, Rude Democracy, Civility and Incivility in American Politics, Susan Herbst suggests that there are both emotional and interactive components to civility that need to be better understood. She offers some ideas about how we can behave more civilly when engaging in political discussions. For instance, we can utilize the media we have at our disposal for more intelligent and effective debates. We can recognize bad habits and counteract them. We could develop a thicker political skin. And we could acknowledge that civility is a tool that can help us advance more productive debates. However, in her book, In Your Face Politics, The Consequences of Uncivil Media, author Diana Mutz argues that incivility in politics should not necessarily be dismissed as a disservice to democracy, as it might be a necessity when there is so much competition for citizens' attention. She does note that there are some negative effects on political attitudes from the current state of the media. This can manifest itself in a lack of trust in politicians and the government in general. Incivility not only lowers public evaluations of government and politicians, it lowers trust as well. If politicians appear unbound by the rules of civil behavior, then they're clearly not one of us. She cautions that as entertaining as the set may be to watch, it tarnishes the kind of aspirations the public has for politics and politicians. Another negative impact is that when politicians look like they're getting all up in our face, we are apt to punish the person with whom we disagree and then demonize the position. She suggests that in order to replace incivility in politics, we need to come up with creative ideas that center around what people find exciting about the political process. Unless there is something besides voting for ordinary citizens to do during elections, it will not be possible to draw large numbers of people into the process. In conclusion, more future research is needed to better understand the effects of new forms of media and how it can potentially hurt or help political discourse, because at the moment, there is plenty of room for improvement.